Hello everyone, welcome to our next game analysis. I changed some microphone settings, so let me know if it sounds worse or better. And yeah, today we're gonna analyze game between Dinito and Balint, both of which who were our Shogi Harbour champions. If you don't know what a Shogi Harbour championship is, I will leave a link in the description. Basically, those were two of our three representants during WOSC. And so it happened that they were playing each other in the first round, so personally I was very curious how their fight turned out to be. Let's take a look. So we have Dinito as Sente and Balint as Gote, and we have seemingly a static rook versus swinging rook. But as you notice, Balint decided to move the silver early. And there are pluses to minuses to it. For example, if we were to go for opposing rook, it makes sense to move the silver first to have, all the squares covered early on. In this case, he's going to play central rook, which I would call a rather old-style opening. Nowadays, people prefer to keep their bishop line open. That central rook variation is called Gokigen central rook, just keeping the bishop line open with those pawns being in those positions that require certain proper opening order of moves, sequence. But yeah, it's very often played nowadays. I'm a big fan of that opening actually. So yeah, this is gonna be rather old style opening, and in the meantime you can see that Sente decided to refrain from pushing this pawn and push this pawn instead, which could indicate the right side 4-5 rook. It's a type of static rook opening, where you're gonna develop the knight here, and if the bishop comes here, you will have a nice attack on that bishop. That's the idea, but currently, in this moment, this silver is kind of blocked by the central pawn. So I was considering that Sente was a little bit restricted in the development. In this situation, they don't have really a good space for the silver anymore. So perhaps instead of moving the king, first they could have moved the silver, and once the rook comes here, silver 5-6 was possible, right? A pawn push is answered by silver takes because bishop protects it. I personally was very interested in like sub variation of this, but this is playable for Sente. It's good for Sente if this fight were to happen. Of course, it's a little bit crazy, but it would be good. So definitely, if Sente didn't want to get restricted in the opening and they still would like to play this attack as they planned, maybe moving the silver first before moving the king was important. This shows, order of moves in the opening matters, yeah? All right, let's see what happened after that. So both side castle, yeah. We see that Sente played the silver. Later we will see that they played the gold here. This is more modern castle called Elmo castle. Elmo is a computer shogi software that the castle comes from. And okay, first of all, there is the variation of the castle with the silver being here. Silver being here, or rather here, was also appearing in pro games, so there's no problem with that. My feeling though is that generally this move is good if the opponents were to promote their bishop here, and therefore makes the king's left side more stable. But now that the attack is coming from the center, maybe because the gold is away from the center, makes it weaker. But also what I would like to consider, maybe earlier, is that, as I said, we are a little bit restricted, so we cannot really focus on the attacking. So maybe we should have considered like focusing on the development. If not left side Mino, maybe going for Anaguma. I think that would be playable. Not sure how it would be in, like this high level shogi and so on, but definitely since Sente doesn't have really good way to attack later on, maybe that was a better game plan overall, strategically speaking. Now, generally, if we were to compare king safety, as a general rule, you wanna see how many squares the king is away from the center. So in the current situation, Sente finished their castle. Maybe they will move the other gold a little bit closer, left up, but their king is gonna be on the 7th file, yeah? And Gote's king, 8th. So they're 1 square away from the center, means they have safer king in a way, yeah? They also have Mino castle, and then you have to compare the strength of those two castles. I think that's comparable. But generally that distance of the king seems to favor Gote right now. So Sente doesn't have a good attacking shape, doesn't have a good defensive shape right now. So slowly we might be becoming a little bit unfavorable in this, well, in my human mind, right? And this next move of Gote was particularly good. It's a natural development for the silver, but it's really good because it's now targeting this pawn, which is really difficult to defend. And we're forced to push this pawn, which, as you can see, opens this diagonal. Therefore, in my mind, weakens the king a little bit, and on top of which it blocked Sente's bishop, right? So maybe temporarily this also favors Gote. We had this edge pawn pushed. Sometimes this bishop will come here to harass this side of the board, so this pawn push makes sense. This pawn push makes sense also because the bishop can sometimes come here and attack from this side. So Sente, right, they cannot develop their castle anymore. They have trouble activating the silver, so they figure out if they move the rook in the center, they're gonna attack there, which I find very reasonable and interesting. Gote could have played few moves here. They decided to push this pawn, develop their castle, makes sense. Make this pawn push later more difficult. Sente will conquest the center, but well, they cannot break through, so they have to retreat, and the silver joins the castle. This generally feels right, because we talked that there was a hole here, but as you know, once a piece leaves this side of the board, that means this side of the board got weaker. And Gote had a nice chance to attack here. And now it was a little bit tricky perhaps, like attacking this knight's head and bringing the rook to the third file, third right for Gote, turning into third file rook. It might feel a little bit unintuitive because there is a strong rook of the opponent in the center, but this knight really is left out of defense and it gives Gote good attacking power. What they play is instead of a knight jump, followed by then the pawn 3-5 from Sente's. Of course, if we take, the knight would become the mystic. So they played something else. But interestingly here, if Sente were to put the rook here, the game would equalize. And that is because Gote had a huge advantage of having this bishop activated. And knight jump, although very, very interesting, it made me think a little, generally might be the wrong approach. Yeah, we talked about the attack here, now it also blocks the rook, so kind of blocks the rook and the bishop, therefore might be not the best choice. Yeah, there were more powerful moves, more faster moves with the rook forceful rook activation. Yeah, interestingly though, the game developed in this way. Sente was attacking here. Gote defended very carefully, and here maybe too carefully they moved the silver here. Silver takes was okay, actually, because pawn drop means the knight can escape, which de facto would help this silver develop. So it was totally fine for them to take this pawn. Instead they escaped, and once more helped Sente's rook to develop, right? Yeah, it's a little bit tricky because our knight is becoming a target, but we should think about how to not make the job easy for the opponent, right? This creates this nice shape of rook and pawn, almost ready to promote, so perhaps we should have prevented it. Then we defend, which still looks very good for Gote, and the knight jump. So let's stop a little bit, think about what's happening. Gote has 2-piece castle, Sente has 3-piece castle, but the king distance from the center is different. I feel more comfortable with Gote here. Gote's bishop is blocked, but so is Sente's. And currently Sente's rook looks maybe a little more active, but it's very vulnerable to slow attacks, so Sente is a little bit in a hurry. They do have the move, but we will see what they do with it, right? The knight feels a little bit heavy currently. So they jumped the knight, which was knight takes, pawn promotion, silver takes, rook move. But please stop and compare this to this one. It's the same, or it's the same moves, but a little bit different, right? We have the rook here versus this position, right? The knight that's here is in our hand. So you can see that instead of jumping here, perhaps taking this pawn with the knight was so much better for Sente, right? It's quite interesting. Yeah, slight difference, but big difference. And this knight becomes a very good attacking piece for Gote. They push the rook back. And I think what Gote is trying to do is somehow dislocate this rook by this pawn push. Very interesting. Let's say rook takes, knight promotes, right? This is what we wanna do. But Sente decides to, well, push the silver back and move the gold up. And this was a beautiful move, I think, from Sente, because what happened is this pawn lost its meaning. They will be able to retake the knight. They pushed back the silver and still blocked this bishop. It felt pretty satisfying, I think. So, in a way, this pawn drop was a mistake. And instead, more direct, pawn drop 4-6 felt better, right? If rook takes, then the knight can promote, right? And therefore, we keep the knight advantage on the board. We continue to harass the rook. Feels good. Yeah, so Sente really well answered here, I think, but Gote had an interesting move. Pawn push to 5-6. They're trying to drop the knight here to fork those two pieces, which is very beautiful. Actually, computer is smart, and computer said like moves like pawn drop 5-5. It goes with the proverb drop where your opponents want to drop a piece. It's a nice proverb to remember. That would work here, yeah? Sente decided to take the knight, activate the bishop, and they lost the rook as an effect. And generally speaking here, I thought, well, we lost a rook for the knight, so Gote seems to be much better, right? And generally it is so. It is so, but the castle is still there, and it might be tricky to find a way to break through. Gote decided to promote here, and Sente attacks with pawn drop. And it seems like, oh no, we're gonna take it and we lose the bishop, but bishop is actually protected, so it was fine to take the pawn. And there was this rook drop played. But actually, if we were to ignore that move, rook drop to 3-8 was more interesting because of this very forceful promotion and the fact that the silver would be pinned. This was better to drop the rook here, if we were to drop the rook, yeah. This rook, the idea was to attack with the token, yet still we're not able to like push this token further, right? This square is double protected. This square is protected. Maybe we'll end up promoting this rook here anyway, so it's kind of a wasted move. But what Sente did is they should have taken the bishop. This gives them back the material disadvantage that they had. It doesn't allow what happened in the game, which was they attacked the rook, sure. But now bishop takes bishop, and look what happened. We talked about the square being double protected. Now one of those pieces have to move so that the bishop is taken. And therefore this promoted pawn push becomes possible. That's not really nice, right? Sente tries to attack the rook so they can somehow take this token, but Gote plays forceful check, exchanging this bishop off. But interestingly, they could have taken the bishop. They decide to ignore it and take the silver, saying, if you try to save your bishop, I'm gonna checkmate your king, right? So they have to take it. They do drop the silver. to break the castle further and then promote and take the gold. So now the problem is, it feels good, right? The opponent had 3 pieces in the castle, suddenly they have only 1. The problem in this situation is that this equalizes the game. Weirdly enough, right? It equalizes the game. Our silver, that looked like it was attacking the king, went further away from the king. And de facto, for us to get closer to the king, we have to make 1, 2, like many moves. And this bishop is still a defensive piece in a way. We have to make so many moves. And Sente, meantime, gathered a lot of pieces in hand. So it was probably better to actually take the bishop here. Like pause for a moment. I mean, they still have to defend this piece, right? If they move, then it's like we gained a move. Yeah, we can do something about the rook promotion. It would be totally normal, right? It would be totally winning. The silver is protected by the rook, so we don't really care. It would be a much safer way to go about it. If we take this piece, now Sente played, I mean, they took the rook, obviously. They played this very difficult to deal with move. Knight drop to h6. This threatens to drop another knight. Pawn takes, knight takes, and this is a famous way to break the Mino castle. They have a lot of pieces to follow up with. Rook, bishop, silver, right? And we're gonna learn a cool pattern to destroy Mino today. Gote didn't try to defend. They could have used the gold in hand to defend. There are many difficult computer moves here, but they decide to ignore it and take the silver. Therefore, knight drop happened. Pawn takes, with knight takes. Decided to not take the knight, to perhaps keep this square occupied by the knight. A rook drop follows. Rook, king escapes, bishop drop. Bishop is actually forking the king and the rook. And also notice that in hand, Gote doesn't have good piece to drops. They have to drop a whole general. And it feels like they're completely losing, right now. Probably taking the rook out of the board was a way to win, but there's even a better move in this position. And that is a famous Tesuji, and that is to take this knight. And if you guys are static rook players, I would like you to remember this move. It's so cool. If silver takes, this knight drop, and look, this knight protects here, this knight protects here. Silver drop is a checkmate. That's so cool. Like when I learned this Tesuji long time ago, I was so happy. Naturally, there's quite interesting line. If you ignore, take this, but like generally speaking, like drop is forced here. Generally speaking, this will be winning, for example, knight promotion. Yes, slowly attacking the king, going for a Hishi. Like this is checkmate in 3. Going for Hishi this is again threat, is a way to go. All you have to do is not give Gote enough time to counterattack, and you're good to go. You don't have to force Tsume, right? There is this proverb in Shogi that says, short Hishi is better than long Tsume. Surrounding the king is more valuable than winning the game immediately. And as we're gonna learn here, surrounding the king is more valuable than making a mistake in Tsume. Gold drop was met with bishop takes, and if the king were to take, it was actually a mate, like this. It's a cool way to finish the game, but actually pawn takes is not a mate. I don't know if it happened that Sente was overconfident or they misread one line, but rook takes, king takes, silver drop, king takes is gold drop. And again, if the king went here, it would be mate. The king went to the only square that wasn't a mate, which was 8-3. And now Sente like threw away all of their pieces, and they have to like try to chase the king away. But there's no way to finish this king, yeah? They lack this one piece to drop somewhere. So they had to pass. And unfortunately, that gives turn to Sente. They're forced to drop the silver they got, so once more they have no checkmate. And this time it is, yeah, got at that place, the checkmate. So it was very tense and crazy game. I think we can learn two main things from here. One of big lessons was in the opening. You don't want to get restricted in the opening like this. You have to think ahead of the time how to prevent this happening. And in this case, I think alternatively, you would have to go for the deeper castle to give more sense to the situation. Yes, always think strategically what you want to do and what could prevent you from developing your original plan, yeah? Then in the endgame, although I'm not sure if that's the case in this game, but generally if you're not sure that your move is truly working, like if you're not really sure that your finishing move is a finishing move, like in this case it wasn't, go for the slower approach, go for that surrounding the Hishi move, right? And then, sure, maybe it's not as cool as forced sumo in 21 moves and so on, but let's all agree win is more valuable, right? So thank you guys for staying until here. Let me know if you enjoyed the game. Next time we're gonna take a look at our third champions game, Koshiro. I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.